Good. So we'll get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Owen Bondurant. I'm a partner in Independent RX. And we have, this is our, second webinar in a 4-part series that we're doing with Live Oak. And we are fortunate enough to have a joint customer of both Live Oak and Independent RX. And someone that I've known for quite a while now, Taylor Anglemyer. Welcome, Taylor.
Thank you.
So today we're going to talk about just kind of a few things. An ownership journey is kind of what we've been talking about it, but really kind of how do you get prepared to actually buy a pharmacy? How do you actually buy it? What's the first year look like? And then kind of getting into the management today. And along the way there, we'll talk about financing and a few other things. So like I said, my name's Owen Bondurant. I'm a partner in Independent RX. Independent RX, if you don't know, we are a company that helps people start and buy pharmacies. We also do accounting and have a full accounting program for pharmacies. And we help pharmacies sell. In addition to that, I'm a minority owner in 3 pharmacies. So I'll pass it over to Greco for him to introduce himself.
Thanks, Owen. Thanks for having me on again, and welcome everybody. My name is Greco de Valencia. I am the Senior Loan Officer and Vice President of the Pharmacy Lending Vertical here at Live Oak Bank. I've been with the company been here at the bank for 7 years, and I've been in the healthcare space, specifically with independent pharmacies, for just about 14 years now. So, I'm excited to be here and share my experience and knowledge about the pharmacy financing world. And really the goal here is for me to be able to pull back the curtain for people and answer those burning questions that I know is on everybody's mind. Really glad to have Taylor on with us, because he has been a great customer of ours, and just so happy for his success. And I know he's going to give a lot of insight to people as well.
Yeah, great. Taylor, why don't you give a little background?
Sure. Yeah, I graduated pharmacy school in 2015 and got linked up with Owen and Live Oak Bank around 2017 and ended up having, now I've got 2 stores, 1 traditional pharmacy and 1 retail pharmacy. And yeah, been going really good. So I'm happy to be here, ready to tell you guys all about it.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, thanks. So why don't we start there? How you have when did you, maybe let's just start from the beginning. When did you kind of start thinking about owning a pharmacy? Like, when did that start?
I'm probably one of those people that maybe started in the pharmacy world with for all the wrong reasons, because I didn't really know what it was all about. I barely really understood what a pharmacist did when I started pharmacy school. So I don't know, probably midway through, I started to realize that I was going to probably not want to work, or I was probably going to want to work for myself or own a business. But I really kind of got serious about it, in my first couple of years as a pharmacist. That just solidified it for me that ownership was definitely the way I was going to be wanting to go.
Yeah, that's interesting you say that, because my dad is a pharmacist and was a pharmacy owner, and when he went to pharmacy school, he didn't know what a pharmacist was. And oddly, he ended up owning them too. And then also my partner Tim said about halfway through pharmacy school, he was like, well, I'm not sure I want to be a pharmacist. So yeah, that's not the first time I've heard that story.
I think a lot of pharmacists go through the emotional roller coaster of, is this really what I want to do? And
yeah, sure.
Sometimes it just takes a few years to get in the groove of things, and then you realize that it is. And but yeah, ownership is a totally different game, and it's one I'm glad I did, for sure.
Yeah, so let's expand on some of this. So you kind of decided that maybe you wanted to work for yourself. I mean, did you take steps to get prepared for ownership? Was there
yeah, somewhat. So I always knew I wasn't gonna, there's no way they were gonna convince me to do a residency. I wasn't gonna be, working my first 2 years at half pay and, basically still being in school. So I always knew I was going to be community pharmacy. So from right when we started picking our rotations, everything I picked was just, I tried to figure out how can this help me learn more about community pharmacy, and all the other ones I just did were just because of being required. So I learned a lot there, and then my first job, I kind of had the choice. I could go to one of the big chains or the regional grocery store or something, but I decided to make it a little bit of a drive. So my first job was at a small town independent pharmacy, and learned a ton there. And that's just kind of what I did. And everything I did, I was just focusing on trying to figure out this business, and how does it work, and can I make it work for myself?
Hey, Taylor, looking back at the time that you were working in that community pharmacy, from what you know now, was there anything that you remember from back then of things that really stuck out that have carried with you today?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, that's the small town community pharmacy is a very different setting than you get when you're working in a big city at a chain. It just is. You have so much more to do, to pay attention to. The pharmacist I worked for had been a pharmacist for a long time. And so I got to kind of see what's it look like 20, 30 years down the road for someone. And I had my own ideas about how things should be. So yeah, I kind of saw every bit of that business, for better, for worse, and learned, what's it look like. And yeah, so a lot of it sticks out, but mainly it's just, you have a different relationship with your customers in your pharmacy than anywhere else. And there's, even as myself, as a pharmacist, I worked really, really hard for that pharmacy, and I really cared about doing a good job. But looking back, especially, I realize now that no one cared about that pharmacy more than that owner, even me. And I did my very, very best, but no one cared about it more than him. So I didn't realize it then, but looking back, it was like, okay, I get it all now. And it all makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. That's cool.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because my dad and I talk about this a lot, that, when we were like, my dad and I are naturally like really, really hard workers, and we would give it our all.
Sure.
But then we would, we were fortunate enough to get a little bit of ownership in like a company, or like actually a profit share. And it was like, well, actually, you know what? I may have a little bit more. And then we got ownership, and it was like, wow, you know what? I care even more, and I can even give more. So that's an interesting thing that you say, is it to point that out. So I guess you were doing all that. And so at what point did you go, all right, I'm ready to go own this thing?
I mean, I was kind of hoping to own that one. And that didn't really work out. So I was ready, from the moment, I don't know. I think I had worked there for about 6 months, and I didn't think I could, because I'm not independently wealthy. There's no trust fund for me. I had a good life growing up, but I don't have $1 million inheritance or anything. I had $280,000 in student loans. And I thought, I don't know if I can do this. So I think the when I really figured out I was ready was I called you, and I was like, hey, I don't have much. Can I do this? And you were like, you were pretty much, it was a long conversation, but the end of the story was, yeah, you can. And at that point, I was just all in, let's get it done. So
that's cool.
Yeah. So that's a common issue. So, I mean, the majority of us don't inherit crazy amounts of money. So,
right.
Coming up with the cash injection, and I don't know if Greco, you want to give people just a general idea of what that cash injection looks like, but so maybe Greco, if you can give a little bit of background on that.
Yeah.
We can talk about how in the world you figured it out.
Yeah. I mean, Taylor's story is not uncommon. I mean, I would say that's probably the majority of individuals who are looking to acquire their first store, which is, really what we're talking about today, right? Like, how do you get, it all starts with one, right? And how do you do that? And Taylor's story is not uncommon. I mean, a majority of the people, they're not independently wealthy right out of school, or even 5 or 10 years out of school, right? And so the question comes up all the time, can I even do this? And you'd be surprised how many sellers today still are like, really? Someone can actually do this and buy it? And, I think that's where, we try to help educate a lot of people about what's needed, because there's always going to be a minimum down payment required, right? And it's how you structure that down payment, where it's coming from, which is really critical. So the devil's always in the details. And it's always like, what is it calculated off of? And prior, back when Taylor bought it, it was more calculated off of the total purchase price. Now there's been some changes, and now it's calculated off the total project cost. So the actual amount has kind of maybe increased just slightly a little bit, but it's just calculated off of a different amount. But the great part about it is, if you have a willing participant and if the price and project is correct, you could maybe even leverage into where you only have to come in with half of that required down payment. And that's how individuals just like Taylor, the people who are listening today who are like, yeah, can I even do it? That's how you have to reach out to the right people and understand where the structure will work. And of course, a lot of it's dependent on the price of the business, right? And the size of the project loan. But it is attainable, and it just starts with that education and making that first phone call to the right person.
Yeah, so Taylor, no, yeah, that like, you're absolutely right. And I think what both of you were saying is, don't let that be a barrier.
Right.
Like, you're an entrepreneur, like, figure it out.
Yeah.
And so Taylor, you figured it out. I mean, so we do have to have some money. Like, what steps did you take? Were there any things that you did to, like, come up with some cash? Because I mean, like, listen, you came out of pharmacy school with 280,000 in debt. Like, I assume you had
Sure.
like enough money to pay rent.
Yeah.
So
keep the lights
like,
on.
yeah, I mean, so how did you get from here to there? Like, you had to do some, I mean, and we could talk about a little bit about the structure here in a minute, but you did have to have some cash.
Yeah, we did all the things that people do when they're trying to save money. I was, in addition to, the work that I was doing at the pharmacy, I was trying to pick up relief shifts whenever I could, and other stores, and I was getting those here and there. I had another job. I was making some money through a hobby, skydiving, for a while, and that was fun. We lived in my parents' basement, for me and my wife, who we just got married at that time. We lived in my parents' basement for like 9 months, so all the tough things to do but I mean, we were just saving cash as fast as we could. We didn't prioritize anything except for saving up cash, and it was tough. We weren't sure if we were going to be able to make it work, but we did.
Yeah. And I think the story there is, I mean, everyone gets there in a different way. I mean, some people, it might be living in your parents' house, just cutting back, not getting coffee, all of those things.
Sure.
Other times it might be that, you're getting a gift from someone, or you're, figuring out a way to, leverage your 401k, or your, or maybe, I've even had clients sell their house, and just, in rent and do that. But, the interesting piece about all of that, and what I love about that story, Taylor, is it just leads right into being an entrepreneur, because entrepreneurship is just all about figuring out, like, you don't have all the answers ever. And you reach out to people who might have the answers, have conversations with them, and you figure it out. So I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, Greco, like, I mean, from a financing standpoint, because I mean, it is all about that structure. And I think sellers and buyers don't understand that, 50% of a deal is how you structure it.
Yeah. Well, I would say, people, I think, view banks a lot like they're all just going to be quantitative. All we're doing is looking at numbers, and that's it, and we're making all these decisions based off of that. Where Live Oak is a little bit different is, we have to look at numbers, right? I mean, deals have to work from a numbers perspective, but everything Taylor just described there is what our CEO will call the eye of the tiger. I mean, call it the qualitative factor, call it the it factor, whatever it is. I mean, for somebody to be able to set those types of goals, make those sacrifices, roll up the sleeves, do the hard work, do the dirty work, right? To get to a goal tells you everything you need to know about the person right there, that they're going to take that same type of hard work into the project that you're financing, and they're gonna get it done. They're gonna succeed. And that's the piece that I think we look at a lot, especially myself, right? Like everything Taylor's describing, he's not going to go into all the nitty gritty stuff, but all the ideas, everything that he's gathering, he was putting that into his plan. And it's like, okay, you don't have a lot. It's a highly leveraged loan. It works from a numbers perspective, but here's your plan. Here's your goals. Here's what you're going to do. That goes a long, long way. And that's really the intersection of what Live Oak does, is try to help people that, on paper it might, and from outside looking in, they're like, oh my God, you're crazy for doing this. But we know the industry, we know the client, we know the Taylors of the world, and we can identify and partner with them and get the deal done. And I'm proud to say, 90% of the time it works out exactly how we planned it. And that's what I take away from Taylor's story. And I hope everybody listening, you need that. I mean, you need that little bit of Taylor, however you get there, like you said, Owen, whatever it is, it's raising capital from investors, leveraging assets that you might have, making the sacrifices, or maybe it's the gift, or maybe it's you're lucky and you're inheriting the money. I mean, it doesn't matter, right? But you have to have some form of what Taylor described. And we'll help you get there, right? We're not going to let you get set up to where you're over leveraging yourself. But we're going to help you achieve your dream and goal if that's what you want.
Yeah, that's great. And that over leveraging is a good segue here, because I think, Taylor, that, in the whole structure. So you went and got your first store. So, okay, you talked to us. I can't remember what did it take, about a year or something?
Yeah, probably about a year, maybe a little
maybe
more.
a little longer. Yeah, to find and get a good store, because when you're looking, and in this case, Taylor purchased a store, okay, but this applies to startups as well.
Yeah.
The whole over leveraging thing. You see, the thing is that when you go to buy a pharmacy, this pharmacy, it's got a cash flow. Okay, so it's got to make money. Okay. And, the thing is let's say that pharmacy is, I don't know, making $200,000. Okay. Well, that's cash flowing. It's making money, unless you pay 2 million for it, because then your debt will be more than what you make.
Yeah.
So you've got to be careful to, make sure that you're buying assets at the right dollar amount, and and that's what Greco is meeting. And I think, Taylor, you did a good job of that, is that, you identified and found a good pharmacy that had good volume, had good profit, and you paid the right price for it. And then I think, as I recall, we passed on a couple opportunities that we couldn't make work, right?
I think we had 4 or 5 things we had looked at that just didn't work out.
Yeah. And whether that was for this reason or that, but I mean, some of it is that people wanted too much money, or it didn't cash flow enough, or,
right.
It just didn't make financial sense. And I think, not over leveraging yourself is really important, but also making sure you have plenty of working capital to, make the changes and work through that. So, so you get your first one. So what was that like? Like, what was the first kind of 90 days, year? Like, I mean, anything that kind of just sticks out and you go, or is there some way to describe that?
Yeah. Like when we were doing the buying process and trying to figure all this out, and I was kind of just starting to see like the numbers of the pharmacy, like when you're a retail pharmacist, even if you're working for a chain, they might show you the P&L to show you how your store is doing, but you're not you don't see everything. They're not putting every detail on that. So this is the first time I've ever seen that before we buy the store. And then after we buy the store, now I've got all the financial information, and then all like the pharmacy management system to look at. And all of a sudden it's like, boy, there's a lot here. So I think half the time that I was here at the store after hours late trying to get something done, what I was really trying to do was figure this place out. Like what's this look like, from an operational perspective? What's it look like from a financial perspective? And it's one of those things, that's probably the point where it's like, okay, I now realize I didn't know what I didn't know, 6 months ago, and I got a lot to learn. So it was stressful, but it was kind of fun too.
Yeah. So maybe could you give a couple of examples of that, like things you just where it was like, I thought I knew, but no, I
what
did not.
Yeah, like generic rebates. How does that work? I just didn't understand that. When we first talked to my wholesaler, I think it was like a phone call, and we talked about the rebate matrix that they had, and I kind of was confused. Honestly, I was just trusting a lot of like, okay, I'm pretty sure Owen knows what he's doing here, and I'm pretty sure Live Oak's not going to give me a loan unless I can make this work. So we're just gonna. Yeah. And then so it's like that first few months, it's like, okay, I know that a big part of me buying the store was I gotta do better at optimizing my buying. That was probably the first thing where I realized I didn't know what I didn't know. And I mean, I've been getting better and better at that for 5 years straight now. But like that was the first one. I didn't know what I didn't know about buying. And so learned a lot there.
It's such a big piece of the profit of the pharmacy, because it's one of the main things that you have in your control. And it's hard, like, when you're going through that initial buying process, obviously you're under NDAs. It is a very, tight-lipped scenario where you don't want a lot going out. So there's not a lot of engagement that you can have with the wholesaler. Sometimes the wholesaler isn't brought in until after purchase agreements, everything's signed, and then you're forced to kind of go through this. And so, that buying piece is big. And you're right, Taylor. I mean, you have to understand that. And it is one of those unknowns, like unknown knowns, like, it's going to be an unknown. You almost have to prepare for it. But any tips you would give any new buyer? I mean, is it just one of those things you got to just learn when you're in there? I mean, is there anything they can prepare for?
One, it shocks me if I talk to a pharmacy owner that isn't intimately familiar with the structure of their rebate deal with their wholesaler. You see all sorts of people trying to figure out different ways to buy drugs through this program or that. Do it through us, and we'll use 95 different wholesalers, and we're going to save you all this money. And it's like maybe, but if you're not first optimizing your rebate and you don't understand that, because you're never going to have all the information from the wholesaler ever. Like there's always going to be an invoice price that how are you really going to know if that invoice price is the best price? But you can still optimize your rebates that you're getting on your generics. You're buying through them. Maybe you get a brand rebate, whatever. If you're not just 100% on top of that every month, I mean, it can cost you thousands. I had a period of like 4 months last year where we weren't doing well, and I looked back at it and I was really disappointed, because literally for probably 4 months straight, I was probably missing out on $5,000. And like that doesn't feel good to learn that. So you really just stay on top on your buying and your rebates. Learn how to use Excel. For goodness sake. I mean, if you don't have to be good at Excel anymore, you can ask the internet how to do it. Figure it out, because you can learn. Yeah, no, I do that like weekly now. So like, it's critical. It's the most important thing. You can only do so much to optimize your payroll, because you need a certain amount of people. You can practically do nothing to optimize your third-party reimbursement. Sorry, just the way it is. But you're buying, you can optimize to the tune of thousands of dollars a month. So I think that's the advice, is figure out your buying and don't skimp on it. That's the thing that
Smart.
should keep you at work a couple extra minutes every night, is figuring out that order for the day.
Yeah, and yeah, it's interesting because I mean, other examples I hear of that are things like inventory management. You know, you're working at a chain and they keep harping on that.
Mhm.
And I hear from farmers, I never really understood why they harped on that until I realized that all my money was sitting on the,
Yeah.
on the shelf.
Yeah.
Or like calling the will call, like, at a lot of chains, they track how many reversals you have and so forth, or return to stocks. And really what they're looking there is like, how many of those will calls didn't become sales? And,
Right.
they don't understand the why behind it. And, we get asked a lot, like, how do you prepare for that? Well, I mean, you can read books and you can, and don't get me wrong, it's really important, I think, to try to go to the ownership workshops and, and, and like read books and attend webinars and follow the
Mhm.
key people in the industry and et cetera. But you will never be ready for that. Like, and my dad always used to say, when you buy a pharmacy, don't fumble the football. And what he means by that is, when you get in there, just sit there, don't change things, don't make big changes, just watch and ask why, because even when you see an older owner who's doing something that appears to be completely archaic, and
Mhm.
it probably is, and it can probably be done with software at this point, there is a reason that they're doing that.
Yeah.
And it is they're tracking something is what they're doing. They've had these businesses because they're successful. So, that's the big advice I can give, is just sit back, listen, ask questions, really understand, at night to, take an hour and just kind of go, okay, why was I doing this? Am I doing this right? Like, really understanding all of that. And that first year will be a ton of work. Like, it is not a situation where it'll be, okay, I'm going to work 40 hours on the bench. It's going to be like 70.
It's a
Yeah.
lifestyle.
Yeah, it's a lifestyle. Now the goal is to get out of that lifestyle.
Yeah. Yeah.
Soon, quickly
I
if
think you've
possible.
gotta, yeah. I mean, please, let's, that'll be the next segment, is how do you get out of that?
Right.
But like, at first, I think you've got to do, in order to be able to then figure out what you need to pay attention to. Like Taylor's saying, like purchasing, like that is something that an owner has to pay attention to, like has to, because it makes up the majority of your cost. So
Hey, Taylor, how much, sellers are such an important, obviously, they're a big piece of buying your first pharmacy. They're a big piece of buying any pharmacy, right? And how much did you obviously had to have some seller participation in this deal structure, right? I'm a firm believer. I think it's a good sign. I think I've always explained it as it's a little bit like a letter of recommendation for the buyer and the store, right? The seller's saying, hey, I'm willing to participate. And when we understand everybody's financial situations and where they are on their time horizon of their life, that can play a difference. But I mean, seller participation is critical. How much did you lean on the seller during that transition time to learn some of these things? Or was it the seller kind of threw the keys to you and you were on your own?
No, I mean, a lot. I mean, the person that I bought the pharmacy from, he could have, he could have picked a different buyer for sure, but he didn't, because he wanted to make sure the store stayed the way it was. He wanted to make sure that his store that he built got to where it is, kept serving this community in that way. And if it weren't for him being equally interested in seeing the store succeed as I was, I mean, yeah, we could have still made it work, but I mean, it was a lot. So I was asking him questions all the time. Like I remember when the first of the year rolled around after my first year of ownership, and all of a sudden this first 3 months, it's like, gosh, where did my third party payments go? Why am I not making as much money? And then I think I asked him, and he was like, well, don't forget, everybody's got deductibles right now. Oh, the third party payments are down, but the cash receivables are up. some things that cause you lots of
Mm.
stress, and you just ask, hey, is this something you stressed about too? Like, yeah, it was. Okay, here's what's going on. And just, especially in the small community that I'm at, you don't want an owner who's adversarial to you, or a seller who was adversarial after the buy. And he wasn't. We really got along well. And yeah, he's, to this day, I mean, he's an interested party in my business, and it's been a good thing for sure.
Great. I mean, that's the
Yeah.
storybook. Owen,
Yep.
I mean, you see a lot of these. What's the tip for when you don't have the storybook? When you've got the more challenging owner. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of people out there thinking about that, like either they're in the process of buying their first, or maybe they already did, or thinking about it, and they've got the will, they've got the Taylor in them, but they maybe don't have the seller that's on the same side.
Yeah, I mean, some sellers are more difficult, and some are also just done. Like, they don't like. It's like, geez, I didn't spend the last 30. I just need to be out of here. But what you got to remember is that owner isn't the only person that works there.
Yeah.
So you've got technicians and people who are working there who know things, right, and may understand why the owner did something,
Great
or
point.
so part of what you're buying is that they've created processes and teams of people. And then the second thing is that, I mean, the beauty in pharmacy is that pharmacy owners talk, right, and there's a lot of advisors. I mean, heck, I remember there's a lot of advisors. So like, you could call Live Oak and they will help you, right? If you have a question, like, we can help you. And there is another 20 of these. Your wholesale. We got so much advice from our McKesson rep, and the guy, and he's actually over top of a buying group now. But I mean, we learned so much from him. Like, he was just a very he gave us the truth and anything we were asking. So and other pharmacy owners, like, they want to talk to you. So for example, my next door neighbor, he owns 4 stores. My next door neighbor owns pharmacies. We are in the same area, and yet we talk business all the time because we're small business owners and we all are having the same problems. So people want to help each other. So don't be afraid. I think the big thing I would advise there is, don't be afraid to ask. Like, you don't know it all, nor should you know it all. And don't let your, I guess, ego get in the way to the point that you won't go have someone else look at your business and go, hey, something's going wrong. Like, tell me what's going on. And also, you may be delusional and nothing's even wrong at all. It's just that as an owner, sometimes you get emotional, and that's just the way it is. Greco, you mentioned seller participation earlier. Could you maybe give an example of what that means and what it looks like? Because I'm not sure everyone knows what that is.
Yeah, I mean, you'll see a lot of the times, the typical, if you do an SBA loan, a typical structure, if you have the minimum 10%, then that means the remaining 90% of the loan can be financed through the cash flow of the business. And, depending on certain things, that structure of a 90-10 might not work, right? So perhaps there's a portion of the 10% that needs to be sliced and diced where the seller participates to help you reach the 10% minimum down payment. Kind of always like to say that that's a little bit like a mini investor, right? They're investing in the transition of the store by participating as part of that 10%. But then also there's another way where perhaps they're taking a portion of the 90% and participating as a financier there. So maybe the structure is like a 10, 10, 80, right? And or maybe it's a 10, 20, 70. I mean, it kind of depends on what their participation level is there. And there's reasons for that. there might be reasons for risk mitigants. There might be reasons because the buyer has some concerns. Maybe the bank has some concerns. Maybe the price doesn't match up to what the bank's willing to finance on that 90. So then the seller has to step in. I mean, all of it is negotiable there in the structure. So sellers do need to, not only from a qualitative standpoint, like Taylor was talking about, being there to help with the transition and being there as a good steward post ownership, which I think is the storybook and the goal, right? We should always go for that in the goal. But from a quantitative standpoint, and sometimes from a structure standpoint, that seller participation might be necessary. And it's just having that open discussion, right? And I encourage anybody, to your point, Owen, it's like you have to not be afraid of having those conversations, because it's not personal, it's just business. And if for whatever reason, structure doesn't work, okay, well, why doesn't it work? Or what can make it work? And that might mean that the seller has to, take some required actions to get the numbers stronger, right? And that's okay. I mean, I equate it to like selling your house. I mean, if you're selling your house and you haven't paid it and it needs yard work and it needs a roof, I mean, buyers aren't going to drive by and go, oh yeah, man, I want to buy that one right there. I mean, you might have to put in a little work to get it up to that curbside appeal. And so it's just that education, that open dialogue that we're always willing to have, to help it get done. But that's that seller participation part. And I'll tell people it's welcomed. Buyers, banks. I mean, I would say that it's a good thing, and there could even be some financial benefits from it too for the seller. So
Yeah, I was going to say the sellers sometimes benefit because they get to spread out the proceeds of the loan. They get interest on that. They can spread out their taxes. It might help them from a tax standpoint, depending. There's a lot of factors to that, but it can be good for the sellers. And the pushback we get a lot with that, and just to be clear, it's not always feasible, right? But a lot of times it is. But the pushback we get from sellers a lot is, oh, that's just not standard, or that's not how deals get done, et cetera. Well, like if you've ever done larger purchases, like my partner Rich is a CPA, and he did acquisitions for a big company. And I mean, these big companies even do seller participation. Like it looked different. It might be through stock options, or it might be through
earnouts,
earnouts and things like that. But it was really just seller participation is what it was. And that still happens to this day, right? I mean, if you ever read up on acquisitions of big companies, you'll see the sellers are involved in this stuff. It doesn't just, oh, it's done. And I think there's I think people don't understand that because they just hear about, the CEO making a bunch of money. Well, guess what? They're not done, and they only make that money if things get transitioned properly.
And I think, Owen, that also speaks to what you said earlier, which is a little bit of the exhaustion that some sellers have. And I think, Taylor he said something really powerful, that he saw into the future when he was working at that first community pharmacy store. And he saw the seller, he saw how much he cared. I'm assuming it's a he, perhaps it was a she. I mean, I shouldn't assume that, but yeah, I mean, it was, he had an insight into that. And I think that's forgotten sometimes, right? I mean, these sellers are exhausted. And so to them, perhaps they are seeing it as still being part of the store. But what we really want to educate them is, at Live Oak, we're really picking the Taylors of the world who are going to be successful. And 9 times out of 10, they actually don't want them there, right? But they just need to be there as a backdrop in the event something's required, or and so I think sellers need to also feel like, yeah, you're exhausted, yeah, you want to cut ties, but it's okay. Like it's not gonna mean that you're gonna have to step back in and buy the store again, right? Or that's not what it is.
No, that's a good point. So speaking of that, so we've kind of gotten, Taylor, from how did you decide, how did you make it happen, now you own the thing. Well, now you're a few years into ownership. So like, what's changed there, and how are you keeping yourself from being exhausted? I guess.
Hmm.
Like, what does that
Well,
look like?
I don't know about all that. I got 3 kids now, so the exhaustion is just a byproduct of being me at the moment. But oh, well. You know, we've a lot has changed. You know, the staffing as much of the same as my staffing is also very different. You know, we picked up this telepharmacy a half hour away from here. That was you know, that adds a lot of work to the business. It's a different kind of work. You know, at this time now, I've got another pharmacist working for me full time, and so I've definitely shifted away from working the counter every single day and working more on the business, and that's been a big change. You know, it took a couple years for me to not get nervous when I went on a vacation somewhere, to you know, to feel like, okay, I'm going on vacation for 4 days. I got to be in the pharmacy the week before 99 hours and get everything ready and this and that. But you know, I never probably really needed that, but it just took me a few years to figure that out. Like for example, today, getting ready for this, I was like, you know what, my beard needs a little bit of a trim. I just left for an hour and a half, and I didn't worry about a thing. I said to my staff, "Hey guys, I'm going to be back in an hour and a half," and I knew that, you know, I knew what I probably should have known all along is these guys are good. You know, I've got good people working for me. We've got good systems in place. I don't have to stress about this. That's probably the biggest change um, overall. And then the other biggest change is just I feel like I know every little thing about this business. I could rank every little aspect of it from you know, on a 1 to 10. Are we good at this? Are we bad at this? And I have a good perception of all that. You know, whether or not we're able to perfectly do everything is a different story. But I have my finger on the pulse of this place more than I have, and it feels like every year that feeling increases.
Well, so you said a few things that really caught my attention there is that you know every little detail. Okay. Well, and that was because you did work 70 hours a
Yeah.
week and you did get into the weeds and you understood exactly why everything was happening.
Hmm.
You've got good advisors around you who are talking to you about these things. You've got a seller that you talk to. So like you have people who've helped you kind of figure all of that out. Then once you figured out, you mentioned systems. So you took all that information and created systems. And I mean,
Yeah.
that's been critical, I assume, to allowing yourself to go on vacation, for example.
Yeah.
And I find that that's something that owners have a hard time, you know, doing because they tend to do it themselves at first to learn it, and then they just never let go of it and never put a
Yeah.
system in that can allow someone to work there. And then the
Well, it's
last
sort of
thing,
like,
go ahead.
yeah, sorry. It's sort of like if you have a messy room or a messy desk, it's kind of like I know where everything's at, you know, but like
Yeah.
you could never expect a relief pharmacist who doesn't work there every day to be able to step in and do some work for you if you don't have good systems, you know. And so
Yep.
yeah, it took some time to figure out how to make that work, but I'd say by the end of the first year we were fully into developing the systems and getting the technology what we needed. And yeah.
But that's, you made a conscious choice to do that.
Yeah. Yes.
And then the second thing I heard you say was now you have the right people. So you have to have the right people doing the right systems, or else then the whole thing falls apart. And I think that's why you've gotten comfortable. It took you 2 years. And really what that uncomfortable was is you probably didn't feel like the systems and the people were quite right. Or the people weren't trained enough to do those systems and little things. And then once they kind of got in there and you saw that you could go to lunch or that you could, you know, be off for a day, then you start getting more and more comfortable. But the right people and the right system, I mean, I don't think owners spend enough time figuring that out.
Yeah. And like I have another pharmacy owner, like you guys are saying, we talk all the time. And me and this guy, if we get on the phone, forget it. We're probably going to talk for an hour about griping about insurance mostly. But Like he always says this. It doesn't get easier every year being a pharmacist. It kind of gets harder. Maybe from the business side of things, it does actually get a little easier. But then every year there's another thing that comes up that you got to do, whether it be some new regulation or some new billing thing that comes up every single year. There's another little thing. So you're always kind of you always have to be looking at your systems, your processes from an operational standpoint. That's all your pharmacy is. Because if those start to get jumbled up, you might start to lose money. If those start to get jumbled up, you might start making more mistakes because things are just getting a little bit messier. So yeah, that's like probably other than the tracking your money and your buying, that's probably the most important thing is tracking your systems, you know.
And you know, the pharmacy industry and healthcare in general is probably one of the most fluid industries that I've ever been a part of or studied or listened to and talked. It's very fluid. And, you know, you have to have a good finger on the pulse of how you're going to handle those the fluidness of the business. And, you know, going back to kind of what's needed is if you're buying a business, you know, and perhaps you're basing, which most things are based on the most recent year, the historical data is giving you some idea on the trends, right? And how it's gone. But the most recent year is kind of giving you the most, you know, accurate look of what things are and then year to dates. And the question that I think a lot of people need to make sure that they're asking themselves is, if the numbers work, great. But two, do you have the emotional intelligence to hire the right people or fire the right people or motivate the right people? Do you have the fortitude and the willingness to figure it out, you know, when the fluid times comes? And do you have the ability, like he's saying, to put the systems in place? Because I think that's what trips up a lot of owners is they want to own, you know, they've got the opportunity to do it, but it's that handling that fluidness. And that's, in my opinion, as things go on, and I know we've got a lot of changes coming in 2024, that's going to be tested big time.
Yeah. I think anybody that sees, you know, things are going to change in 2024 with the DIR situation. And if anybody thinks that there's not going to be something that these third-party companies are going to be trying to do to get that money back, that they're probably not going to be able to get away with taking in 2024, they're crazy. Like, there will be something else coming up that you will have to pay very close attention to. We just don't know what it is yet. But you know, if you got the right people and you can implement something quick, you can manage it.
So what are you doing to track this stuff? Like, I mean, you mentioned money, systems, numbers, like, I mean, because really what you're managing change is what you're doing. You're monitoring certain things to go, do I need to make a change here? Like, what?
Well,
you mentioned a couple things.
I do. I like I said, Chat GPT helps me out with lots of Excel spreadsheets, but like, you know, I think, you know, I use your guys' dashboard through Independent RX, and that can be definitely helpful. There's some things that I'm not quite sure how you guys get that data from my store, but you guys are the only way I can see that in it. Well, the only easy way. And then, but after that, I think everybody, and this just goes back to knowing every little detail about your store, is you probably aren't going to find that metric that you need to track in your pharmacy management system. I mean, there's some RX volume, you know, your gross, you know, sales and things, but it's limited. Even if you have a good management system, your reports you get are limited. So you got to figure out how to track what you need to track yourself. Like what cycle should you track your cash flow on? Like if you're tracking cash flow on a 6-month cycle, did I make cash this 6 months? Who cares? That's not that helpful. Like, I hope you make cash this 6 months, because if you didn't, that's a problem. But you should be tracking maybe every 2 weeks. Did you make cash in this 2-week period when you just had to pay your wholesaler a big bill? So like for me, one thing I do is I track my cash flow on a 2-week cycle that lines up with my wholesaler payments. So the day after I have a wholesaler payment, I go back through my bank account manually. I spend 30 minutes and I just pick through it and I make sure that I made money. I keep a spreadsheet of it. it means nothing to anybody probably but me. I couldn't show that to an accountant and say, hey, this makes perfect sense. They'd probably be like, what is this rambling lunatic? So I track a lot of I track a lot of different things in just a customized little spreadsheet that I made, in addition to all the standard stuff that everybody else looks at.
Yeah, it's
Um,
funny you say that, Taylor. I
yeah.
mean, like we have those dashboards and it does track cash weekly,
Yeah.
but and we manage our pharmacies out of there too, right? So the system we deliver to you, we also deliver our management. But I also, to your point, every month, both for consulting and pharmacy, I go through and I look at the cash and I see where it went and did it go up and down? What caused it? Was there an expenditure that was unusual? Was like, and I go and it probably only means something just to me. But I can do it, like you said, in like 30 minutes. And what I'm looking for there is there something that's gone outside of the last 3 times have I looked at it? And do I
Right.
need to go fix something? Like, is
Yeah.
there something happening that I didn't know about?
Well, like,
because-
are your emotions convincing you that something's wrong when it's really not?
yeah,
Because that you
yeah.
mentioned that earlier, and like this happened just like, I don't know, 6-7 months ago. The cash just I wasn't feeling comfortable with the way my cash was moving out of my bank account. And I was like kind of worried about it. I called over to my accountants, and in a couple days we were talking, and it was like, no, man, you're fine. Like, what are you talking about? And then I just had to go back, and I went back and I looked at my cash flow spreadsheet, and I was like, okay, this actually, I'm not as crazy as it was a bad 3 weeks, but I've had bad 3 weeks before, and it comes back. It's all a cycle. And if you're not paying attention to that, your emotions can quickly make you think your pharmacy is or isn't something that, that you're wrong about.
And what's important about having that too is it's your own like supporting information. So when you go have that talk with the accountant or whoever you're having, it's like you've got something to kind of have for the reason for the call. And then they can provide the background on it. And then from there, you can almost like it's like you're doing your own mini forensic accounting on what might be going wrong and how to fix it. And I think that's the part that a lot of new owners don't think about, because the previous owner, most of the time, if there's a legacy owner, don't have a lot of long-term debt on their balance sheet. So really the biggest debt that's ever going out is the payments to the wholesalers. When you buy a pharmacy and you finance a pharmacy, you're putting long-term debt on the business. And, we get back to that leverage point. You don't want that to be over leveraged, but that's a big piece. And I think a lot of new owners forget that, because the old owner, they're going to be like, I don't have something like that in place. Why do I need it? And perhaps the sooner people can kind of start to think about and educate themselves, to your point, Owen, they're never gonna, you can attend as many webinars, but until you're doing it yourself. But that's important. So I love that you do that, because it just gives your own little peace of mind and system in place that you can, doesn't matter what it is.
And it goes to each and everything you do in your business. If it has to do with your finances, if it has to do with your operations, your workflow, whatever. I mean, gosh, if somebody looked at my computer right now, they'd probably be able to open up probably 50 spreadsheets, and I could probably only remember what the hell I was looking at for half of them. But sometimes you just have to sit down and just kind of just dig in a little bit. And that's the key thing that I look at to keep things running smooth around here, is just something comes up and you figure out a way to track the metrics on it, so to speak.
Yeah. And those can be different. Like, I mean, for example, we don't work in the pharmacies very often. But we do every once in a while. And really all we're trying to do is see, is the system still operating?
Yeah.
Right. Is the operational systems, are they still in place, or did they divert from something? And if they did, why? Right. Maybe the staff decided that they needed to change that system. And they may have had good reason. So, that can even be, I think by the Excel spreadsheets, you mean like getting your hands on it right? You're trying to like really see it. And so,
Yeah.
operationally, it might just be working in the store every once in a while, or, but also having those other metrics. So we have a question, and you can go to the Q&A at the bottom if you have questions. Feel free. We're happy to answer some of these. Our first question we have was, what inventory management software do you recommend? Do you do perpetual? How do you manage your inventory, Taylor?
Yeah. So ours, we use Cardinal Health for a wholesaler, and we use their inventory management system.
Oh yeah, that's
Um,
good. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, if you have one, if your wholesaler has one, I would use it, because when you're using a third-party inventory management system, you're dealing with EDI data. And when that data just goes from one place to another in any kind of intermediary, it just seems like it's just never quite right. Maybe it won't catch that reversal, or you'll send your order off to your wholesaler and it doesn't quite all get there. So we've always had good success with Cardinal. Their inventory management system, really learned how to use that well, but that's also just a product of, it happened to be the system I already knew when we started, and the system they were already using. So we just kept that going. I think any system you use, as long as you just make sure you learn it, they all have a lot of functions. Make sure you know all of them, because if you don't know all of them, you're not going to be able to figure out which one is going to help you, get to 25 turns a year.
And kudos to that seller for having something like that already in place. I would say it's not always the case. And for new owners, when we're looking at financing a transaction, we ask those kind of questions a lot. And for the new owner out there who's looking to buy, or maybe already buying, Taylor just said something that's so critical: how to get your inventory turns up. And I mean, if you can get to that 20-25 turns, and for anybody that doesn't know those, that's okay. We're maybe we spend one of these days talking about that, but you can Google it, right? You can find what it is, and you can figure out how to do it. It's a real simple calculation, but it's critical. I mean, if you can do that, you're going to save money, because you're freeing up cash flow. And when you're doing that, you might not be able to make more money, but it's about cash flow. Your money isn't tied up in the largest asset on the balance sheet, which is the inventory, and it's free to do other things, right? And that's where you gotta do those types of things.
Yeah, and I think the answer to the inventory management question is just use one. I mean, there's data rhythm. Your pharmacy system can do it, and get to know it, like understand how it works, so that you use it right. Because again, getting those turns up is where your cash is. We have another question here. It says, hi, opening an LTC pharmacy here in California, using McKesson as our supplier. Should I stick with one supplier or look at others? So you're starting a store. Here's my opinion on that. Right now, your number one thing is to get business in the door, because you have no idea whether you should be using multiple suppliers or one supplier or some other option until you have enough volume to calculate that. And when you start a store, your number one thing you should be thinking about 24/7 is how you're going to get business in the door. And then you start figuring out the rest of it. Taylor mentioned earlier that it has taken him several years to get to this point, but you don't learn all these systems and create all these systems and have the perfect delivery out of the gate or in the first 3 months. And you don't even know what systems and that you need until you have the volume. And like, I mean, you may think in your head, hey, I'm going to do all assisted living. What if you end up with all nursing home? Now your systems are all different.
Sure.
Right. So like, I wouldn't get too caught up in that out of the gate, would be my opinion. Just try to buy as well as you can. But I mean, you should be dreaming about how you're going to get someone in to do business with you. It would be my answer. And stick to something simple out of the gate, because you don't want to waste time on things. Now, as your volume gets up, I would reevaluate that and look at all options. And I tell people, as much as I've, we've been a McKesson customer actually for 20 some years, I think. You got to reevaluate that every couple of years because your mix may have changed. Things with the wholesaler may have changed, reevaluate, see where you are. Would be my answer. Taylor, anything to add to that?
Yeah, if you haven't opened, there's no way to know, because like
Yeah.
if you run a really high brand name percentage on your mix, then you're going to be wanting to optimize everything you can through your primary wholesaler. But if you're running a really high generic mix, you might find that you're going to get a lot better deals shopping it around. That might be your full-time job, is just finding good deals on generics. But like you're going to be somewhere in between, and this just goes right back to what we were talking about. If you don't know every little detail about your purchasing deal, every little thing about your metrics, if you don't know how to use Excel, you're never going to figure these things out. Once you get that mix figured out and you kind of get in the groove of things, your brain is just going to click because you're going to have more information and you're going to know what to do. As long as you are paying attention, you'll be able to figure that out. If you're not paying attention, you're going to lose a lot of money.
Agreed.
Hey, Taylor, here's a question that we get a lot from first-time buyers. They look at the pharmacy software system reports that show like total sales, total amount billed, and those types of things. And then they compare them to the financials and they're like, what? Why doesn't this match up? And I mean, for one, what would you say in that situation?
Yeah.
And follow up would be, what do you put the most faith in?
I put the most faith in a mix of your financials with your own little thing that you're looking at. Like I said, my cash flow thing. The pharmacy system is really good because it's always there and you can go back to the day you started. And so I look at those. I look at volume information. So like if you're looking at something simple that your pharmacy system is going to be 100% correct on, like how many scripts did you fill? Obviously, you just look at your pharmacy system. Gross revenue, I don't know. That's never matched up for me, that the gross revenue that the insurance told me I was getting paid is actually what I got paid. That's not going to happen, So you look, it just depends on what number you need. If you're really trying to find your gross revenue, you should look at your books that you're doing your bookkeeping, your accountants, because that's going to take into account all the weird DIR fees that came up that took away from your gross revenue. Maybe you had OTC sales that your pharmacy management system isn't tracking, or maybe it isn't tracking well. So it just depends. But that's the key, is having your finger on the pulse of your business, so you know what numbers you can trust and which ones you can't. Because if you just think that every number that your pharmacy management system out is going to be correct, it's not. If you think that every detail of your business you can glean from your P&L, that's also wrong. There's certain things that each thing is really good at showing you, and then there's some things that you'll just never really know, like how did they figure out that DIR fee?
Yeah.
It's funny you say that, Greco. That's literally how we got into accounting. That problem right there is that the pharmacy system never matches with your financials. And we actually even hired, when we had 16 stores, we hired, or actually he became a partner, and he's our partner in our accounting, Rich, a CPA, to try to figure out how to get these things to match. He spent about 5 years and just couldn't figure it out. So we just said, screw it. You're not going to get them to match. And that's how we ended up having, hey, here's your financials. Here's a set of other metrics, your cash and your pharmacy system data and your payroll data. My dad used to actually do this all in Excel. He called it the 2-week spread, similar to what Taylor's saying. And we just made it digital. And literally what we were doing was tracking cash, financials, pharmacy system data, because they all tell a slightly different story and they'll never match up. And if you can kind of get a flow with that, you can start really identifying things. And the reason Taylor likes to look at 2 weeks, and why we looked at 2 weeks was, month to month, if you have 5 Mondays in a month, it throws your month off. but every 2 weeks, it's just one after another, right? So it's always consistent and it's the same data over and over, and you can start seeing trends. And that's a big problem. And it's, again, one of those things that, I mean, they don't teach you that when you go to business school or pharmacy school, or, I mean, like, they just don't. And you're only going to learn that when you get in there.
And I think a lot of first time buyers, and even second and third store buyers, they're looking at buying the business like they're looking at buying a house. And they're so concerned about, well, what, and cost of capital is important. I mean, don't get me wrong, right? I mean, that is important, but they're not thinking about all these types of factors that come into the transaction. That really is what makes and breaks the deal, right? Leverage points, all these systems, are they in place? Can you put them in place? Is there at least a semblance of reliable information that the seller's providing that can give you good insight into where you can, squeeze out some profit? And I just, the message all the time is, and people think that this is just like a, sales cry, but pharmacy really is different. I mean, it really is the niche of businesses. And I've talked to private equity people who are like, it's a head scratcher, man. They get in, they're like, it's a head scratch, healthcare is challenging. I mean, and so, I guess my final advice to everyone is make sure that whoever it is that you're working with has some experience in this, because if they don't, you could be unwinding something that is going to be a costly mistake.
So I was going to end this after that question, but we got two other really good questions that have been coming up a lot. So the first being, what are your recommendations for pharmacy entrepreneurs regarding retail stores, brick and mortar versus online pharmacies? Discuss the pros and cons. So we are getting this question, and then also as well as financing available for e-pharmacies. So we are getting this question a lot. Here's my opinion on this.
We got this last week on our town hall.
Yeah. So my opinion on this is that brick and mortar pharmacies are going to have an online presence. Okay, we've got Amazon, we've got Mark Cuban, we've got these capsule pharmacies, we've got all this online stuff coming up. Okay. And even if you look at CVS and Walgreens, they are making it easier and easier for people to do refills and transfer meds and doing things online. Okay. So I think that any pharmacy that's not thinking about their digital strategy is getting behind. And I'm talking about from beginning in, not just from a marketing standpoint on your website, but how are you telling patients that their refills are ready? How are patients paying? There's software like Heal Now that will text people, and then they can pay their copay on their phone, so that all they have to do is just drive by and pick up their stuff. Okay, so what is your digital strategy, and how are you providing an online experience for your brick and mortar customers? However, the brick and mortar has a place, and even if you look at Mark Cuban's company, they are looking to partner with independent pharmacies to deliver some of their product. And the reason for that is not everyone wants to get it online. They need to talk to a pharmacist. They need to come in and talk. There is something about healthcare where people need to have that conversation, or their med has changed and they need to talk about that. So I believe that this is a little bit like back in the 2000s, a lot of companies were like, oh, we're going all e-commerce, but actually we might need the brick and mortar. Right. And they kind of needed both, you take the Targets and so forth. So that is my opinion, is that you've got to be prepared to go after digital strategy, but the brick and mortar definitely still has a place, especially for counseling and testing and, making compounds and doing all that kind of stuff. I don't know if anyone's got anything to add to that.
Yeah, I agree. I think and the question asks what's Live Oak's finance e-pharmacies, I think we're looking at pharmacies that are having that online presence, but that brick and mortar location, right? I mean, I'm in the backyard of Silicon Valley in San Francisco, where there's been so many different online pharmacies that have tried to get off the ground, yet to be really successful at it. So and there's a lot of other things that come in with how you capture customers, the way that Apple changed some of their sharing requirements and regulations really impacted a lot of online stores. And
Yep.
so for right now, I would say no, that's not something that really we're looking at, because it's just not within the scope of the lending sphere. But you're right. There's got to be an online presence, and you've got to be able to have a digital ability to your business, and how to strategize that too, because a lot of farmers, again, going back to like, well, a current state versus future state, current state of what a pharmacy might be buying or have already bought, you probably not there, right? They probably don't have that online. So you've got to build that, and you got to know how to do that. So
I mean, I kind of liken it to restaurants, right? Like, let's say you're going to do a takeout order. It drives me insane that I can't order sometimes online and then do curbside pickup, right? Otherwise, I'll just go and eat there. Because if I got to call them and I got to talk and I got to do all this, right? It's same with pharmacy. People want to, people want to be able to do things digitally. And the fight back I get on that is, oh, all my customers are old. Listen, people, my mom is 69. She wants to do it on her phone. End of story. And so, that's kind of our answer there. And then our last question was, how do you get a hold of us? We can put in the Q&A or in the chat here. Our website's independentrxconsulting.com. Live Oak Bank, if you Google them, you can find them. You can find Greco and I both on, you can find both of us on LinkedIn if you just search for us. So thank you, Taylor, for your time. I know we went a little bit over, but and I really appreciate you trimming up your beard for this.
Hey, thanks. Hey, that's the other benefit of being a pharmacy owner. If you want to grow your hair long and have a beard, no one can stop you.
True, good point. Yeah, that's fantastic. And I have to throw this in, but I still won't hold it against you that you're a Kansas City Chiefs fan.
I can't help it,
man. All right. Well, thanks for the time. Thank you, everyone. And we have another one, I think, in early April. So be on the lookout for that.
Thanks a lot, Owen. Appreciate it. Thanks, Taylor. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.
Thanks for including me. See ya.